lesson from James chapter 2, 14 to 26. And as Jason already observed, this is a great passage, and you're going to have fun, I think, dealing with it. As far as the focus attention, of course, we're going to talk about what's leading up to our celebration day, but we're also going to talk about that whole idea of hypocrisy. You know, what is the definition of a hypocrite? Have you ever personally witnessed hypocritical behavior? I think that everybody will resonate with that. And all of us are fearful that sometimes we too act and respond hypocritically. But that's what I liked about the emphasis on this. It says, you know, true Christians aren't perfect. They're not going to live perfectly. And so the accusation of hypocrisy sometimes is leveled at us. But as we approach James 2:14 to 26, we're talking about three phrases that encapsulate the idea. The first, of course, is the idea of dead faith. And again, this is where we were just talking about what puzzles some people in verse 14 is that James says, "What doth it profit, my brethren, though a man say he hath faith and have not works? Can faith save him?" Well, that's what has puzzled people throughout time, thinking that James is arguing in favor of a works-based faith. But again, in the context, that is absolutely not what he's saying at all. And so...
and if they read the first couple of chapters, they know
exactly. It's in the context. You always, hermeneutically, you always place things in its proper context, historically and grammatically. And Jim is just exactly right. If you read it with the understanding of the context, you're going to realize that James is just saying, hey, true faith is demonstrated by good works. Okay? And so we jump into that a little bit further. The person who truly believes, that person is going to have action that shows forth their faith. And again, there's just really not a conflict. It's just sometimes a perceived conflict. Okay, then he gets into defining working faith.
Yes.
And that's in verses 18 and 19. And I really thought that there were some pretty important insights that we need to glean from that. But you'll notice that James points out in this text that even the demons know God, believe. And how do they respond to knowing God and his power? They tremble, they shudder. And so the point of it is, and I think it's a great example, to the Jewish readers, they would have read this always reflecting on Deuteronomy 6:4, about God is the one God. He is to be worshipped with our whole being, right? And that would have been a common recitation on the part of the Jews. But it's a difference in a relationship and a heart understanding of who God is and a head understanding. Because that's the point. Demons understand who God is and his power. And it makes them shudder. But that is not saving faith. Just because they know and understand God, it's not a heart issue for them. It's just a matter of head knowledge. Okay, so you can develop that. Mark 12 is kind of a passage that you might want to have someone read while you're looking at this particular example. But you'll remember in those verses, that's where the scribes come to Jesus about the great commandment. What is the great commandment? And he explains to them that it is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, right? And to love your neighbor as yourself. Well, that's faith in action. That's showing forth true faith and not dead faith. And then the latter part, verses 20 to 26, talks about what is required with saving faith. And what's interesting is at this point, James introduces two biblical characters that are really at opposite poles, but yet they both exemplify great faith, and their works show forth their belief in God, right? And who are the two characters biblically?
Abraham and Rahab.
Yes, Abraham and Rahab. And you're talking about the great patriarch of the Jewish nation and the faith he exhibited with Isaac and other things, just absolutely leaving Ur of the Chaldees and having no idea where God was taking him. But by faith, he went there to knowing that God would take him to a place and a city that was built by God, right? But Rahab, on the other hand, is a Gentile. She's a woman living an ungodly life, but yet she shows great faith by her actions. And it's really interesting, and you can probably have somebody read this in Joshua chapter 2, but this is what Rahab said in Joshua 2:9. And she said to the men, I know that the Lord hath given you the land, and that your terror is fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land faint because of you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when ye came out of Egypt, and what he did unto the two kings of the Amorites that were on the other side of Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom ye utterly destroyed. And as soon as we had heard these things, our hearts did melt, neither did there remain any more courage in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and in earth below. Now that's a testimony on the lips of an ungodly Gentile woman in Jericho. But her faith was exhibited in her testimony and in her actions when she saved the two spies, right? Now, when you think about it, and I just love that story, because for 40 years, the people of Jericho had been scared to death of God's people, ever since they heard what happened to the Egyptians at the Red Sea. And yet, the Israelites said, oh, we're like grasshoppers in their sight, and they wouldn't go any further, right? So they wandered around for 40 years. And these Canaanites have been scared of Israel's God ever since.
What are they doing out there?
They probably are. They're just circling us for 40 years. But
Spies spying out the spies.
But the point of it all is, isn't it? That and look at this parallel. A lot of the Canaanites were like the demons in James because they knew God. They knew of God. They were afraid of God. They trembled at that. But yet they did not have any kind of faith that would rescue them, save them, except for Rahab. And her faith was put into action when she saved and rescued the spies, right? So this saving faith is going to be demonstrated in the way that we show forth our good works because we have true faith in God. And that's how we should develop this lesson. And then, I just tied it into the fact that, hey, on the personal challenge part, we can all show forth our good works and the fact that we have faith by just praying for the people we want to see saved, by extending invitations to people to have them come. That is saving faith that is exemplified in our actions. We're already saved, but because we're saved and because we know he loved us and he first loved us, then the love of Christ constraineth us to do these other things. Okay? So you'll enjoy this, I think.